A guest slipped getting out of the hot tub. It wasn't a catastrophic injury. He went to the ER, got discharged that same night, and finished his stay with his family. 11 days later, however, that same host got a letter from a personal injury attorney. 6 months after that, she was out of pocket $49,700. This is exactly what happens when a normal short-term rental incident meets the wrong insurance coverage. Today, we're going to walk through it. As always, I'm Cody with Threshold STR. We're a short-term rental insurance and risk advisory firm. This video is going to be the first in a series that we're going to call incident reports. These are real claims, obviously anonymized, but we're going to walk through them start to finish. These aren't theory, these aren't hypotheticals. This is actually what happened and what the coverage did or didn't do, as well as what it cost. Let's get into this one. Okay, so starting with the property, this property was a 3-bedroom cabin in a mountain market. It was around 1,800 square feet. The host was listing it on Airbnb as well as VRBO, averaging about $385 a night during peak season. This particular host had been operating it as a dedicated STR rental for 2 years. And the featured amenity in this property, as well as in the listing photos, was a 6-person outdoor hot tub on the rear deck. Now, here's the thing about this particular host. She was very conscientious. The hot tub was professionally serviced every month. The water chemistry was even tested weekly. And the deck had been rebuilt 18 months earlier, fully to code, obviously. And she also had a homeowner's policy with a major national carrier that I won't name. She also knew about AirCover, and she thought she was covered. Obviously, she was not. So I'm sure you're wondering, well, what happened? So a family of 4 checked in for 4 nights during the winter, and during the second evening after dinner, 2 of those guests went out to use the hot tub. It was also below freezing outside at this point. The deck was wet from earlier use, and some of that water on the deck had refrozen on the surface. The husband stepped outside of the hot tub. His foot landed on a frozen patch of the deck. He slipped and fell backward onto the rim of the hot tub. He briefly lost consciousness, went to the ER, was diagnosed with a concussion and soft tissue injuries, but he was fine. Ultimately, he was discharged that same night, and the family finished the trip. They did not mention any of this to the STR host at its checkout. And then, as I mentioned earlier, 11 days later, the host got a certified letter from a personal injury attorney demanding $34,500. So here's where the insurance story matters. She, being the host, called AirCover and opened a case. She also called her homeowner's insurer, and 5 business days later heard back from her coverage that they sent a denial. The relevant language was quite simple. It said, liability arising from business pursuits and commercial activity is excluded. Obviously, the claim had happened during a paid rental, and so her homeowner's policy did not apply and thus was denied. And then 3 weeks later, AirCover also came back, and then they confirmed that incident qualified for review. But they did cite that their exclusion for claims arising from the host's failure to maintain the property in a reasonably safe condition. The absence of the non-slip surfaces around the hot tub, no signage, and no grab bars was ultimately the logic. So they ultimately denied that portion of the claim. AirCover paid out $11,200 of the medical bills as a goodwill gesture, and that was it. So she had $11,200 from Airbnb, a denied homeowner's claim, and a formal lawsuit that was just filed in state court. Then what followed was 6 months of litigation. She hired a defense attorney. It was a $9,000 retainer fee up front, and then over the next 5 months, it was site inspections, depositions, an engineering expert that came out to evaluate the deck and the hot tub setup. In the host's deposition, the plaintiff's attorney asked her one question that essentially ended the whole case. He had asked whether, before she listed the property, she had even considered that guests would be stepping out of a hot tub onto a wood deck in sub-freezing temperatures without having any sub-freezing, slip-resistant surface in place. She answered honestly and said that she hadn't. 4 days before the trial, the case had settled at mediation, and it was $41,500 to the plaintiff. So the total out-of-pocket for the hosts after the AirCover's contribution was $49,700. The settlement, the defense attorney, the expert witness, and the mediation costs. So for her, this was roughly 4 months of net rental income on that property was gone just from this one incident. Now here's what would change this entire story. If this particular host had been carrying a purpose-built short-term rental liability policy at the time of the incident, this outcome would have looked vastly different. That policy would not have a commercial activity exclusion because it would have been written specifically for commercial guest activity. It would also not exclude ordinary negligence because covering ordinary negligence is the entire point of having it. This carrier would have assigned an adjuster and a defense attorney within days, and that settlement would have been paid from policy limits, and the defense costs would have been paid separately, not counted against those limits. So the host's out-of-pocket exposure would have been her deductible, $1,000, maybe $2,500, and the annual premium for a policy like that on a property like this, somewhere around $2,000 a year. So $2,000 a year versus the $49,700 absorbed on this one single incident. That host now carries a policy, and the annual premium is $2,100. So what does this mean for you? Well, I would say there's two main things that are worth taking from this video. One being, if you have a featured amenity in your listing photos, it's also in your liability profile. So this could be hot tubs, pools, fire pits, maybe trampolines, lofted beds, outdoor stairs, waterfront access, all the above. So whatever draws your bookings is likely the same thing that your carrier will look at when something goes wrong. Make sure you audit those amenities specifically. And then two, coverage that excludes ordinary negligence isn't actually covering you for the most common type of claim that you will face. Slip and fall claims allege that kind of negligence by default. So if your liability coverage excludes it, you have a gap on your most likely event. We do publish these incident reports because the gaps between what most hosts assume will happen and what actually happens is much bigger than most people realize. If you want to see what your exposure is, again, we do have a free risk score at thresholdstr.com. It takes about 5 minutes to complete, and we also place proper short-term rental insurance for hosts who realize that they have gaps. If this was useful, please do subscribe. We have more incident reports and more videos coming. Until then, have a great day. We'll see you in the next one.